They posted the listing at 7:14 in the morning. Cozy seaside getaway. Summer fun. $350 a night. My sister had written that. About my parents' house. The house I had just bought them. The house I had paid $425,000 for in cash 4 days ago. There were 63 texts on my phone by the time I pulled into that driveway. Wet towels on the porch railing. 2 empty beer cans on the steps. The front door banging open in the sea breeze, letting the cold salt air trade places with the smell of stale beer and fast food grease. My mother was standing at the kitchen sink, her knuckles white around a dish towel, her shoulders shaking. My father sat in a hard kitchen chair that someone had dragged into the living room, his hands trembling in his lap, staring at the floor. And my brother-in-law Kyle, wearing my father's new bathrobe, pointed a finger at my dad and said, calm as someone who has never been wrong about anything in his life, "This is my house. Get out. My name is Olivia. I'm 37. I'm a neurosurgeon. And I had spent my entire life fixing things. Brains. Problems. Panics. Disasters. Before I understood that some things don't need to be fixed. They need to be ended. Welcome to this channel, where we tell the stories of the people who carried everyone else until the day they finally set the weight down. If you have ever been the one who solved the crisis quietly, at midnight, while the people who caused it slept, this one is for you. Drop a comment with where you're watching from tonight, and subscribe, because what I pulled out of my briefcase in that living room is the reason this story has an ending worth hearing. Let me back up. Because what happened in that house didn't start there. I learned to read adult silence before I learned to read chapter books. My childhood was a small, cramped apartment with thin walls and thinner money, and I was the family barometer. I knew what kind of night it would be by the sound of my father's key in the lock. A heavy stomp meant he'd lost a bid. A long, slow turn meant exhaustion. A jiggle and a curse meant he'd been drinking. I was 10 years old, and I had already mapped every frequency of parental fear. My mother, Ruth, would sit at the kitchen table after difficult phone calls, shuffling envelopes. The white ones were fine. The ones with red lettering were the enemy. She moved them from pile to pile as if rearranging them could change the numbers inside. My father, Sam, worked construction, and his body was always tired, but his voice was the most tired thing about him. "We'll figure it out" was his prayer. It was his curse. It meant I have no idea what to do. I became useful early. Not because anyone asked me to, because I couldn't stand the alternative. At 10, I was hiding the red-stamped envelopes under my mattress so my parents wouldn't see them and panic. I thought if they didn't see the bills, the fear wouldn't start. It never worked. The power would go out. The phone would ring. My mother would cry. I would sit in the dark and make myself a promise. I will never live like this. My sister Julia, 2 years younger, had a different strategy entirely. She made noise. While I was learning to be invisible and useful, Julia learned to be loud and dramatic. And it worked. Our parents, exhausted by the baseline anxiety of just surviving, caved to her tantrums because silence was cheaper than another hour of screaming. My 12th birthday. I had asked for a science kit. I had heard them whispering. "We can't, Sam. I know. I know." The day of my birthday, Julia threw a 3-hour tantrum because her shoes were ugly. She said she would die if she had to go to school in them. My parents gave her the money. My father's face was gray when he handed it to her. I got a small cake and a hand on my shoulder. "You understand, Olivia?" My mother whispered it. "You're the strong one. She's fragile." I learned my lesson. My needs did not matter. My performance did. Julia learned hers. Her feelings were currency, and they always paid. So I studied. I studied until my eyes burned and my friends had stopped calling. I put myself through school on scholarships and back-to-back jobs. I served tables. I cleaned labs. I didn't sleep for most of my 20s. I became a neurosurgeon. I specialized in fixing the most complicated, delicate things in the world. My apartment was all glass and white walls. My bank account didn't make my heart stop. I had silence. But you can't fix your own past with a scalpel. I would call home. Same apartment. Same thin walls. Same smell of old potatoes. My father's cough was deep and wet. My mother's voice was still small. They were approaching their 50th anniversary with nothing to show for a lifetime of work except debt and 2 daughters, one who escaped, and one who just kept taking. I went to visit a few months before the anniversary. My mother was trying to hide a new set of envelopes. This time from a pharmacy. Dad's heart medication. Mom, what is this? It's nothing, dear. The copay went up. We'll figure it out. That phrase. After 50 years, they were still figuring it out. Still standing on the edge of the same cliff. I looked at her hands on those envelopes and I made a different kind of decision. Not from obligation. Not from guilt. From something colder and more deliberate than either. I was going to extract them. I was going to put them somewhere the cliff couldn't reach. It took 6 months of searching. I didn't want a mansion. I wanted a fortress. I found it. A small blue house by the sea in a quiet community in Maine. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen. A big wooden deck. $425,000. I paid cash. I put the deed in their names. I wanted them to own one solid thing on this earth. Completely and totally. I spent 3 days there alone before I told them. I hired painters. I had the floors cleaned until they looked like honey. I bought a sofa the color of oatmeal and sat on 10 before I found the right one. I stocked the fridge with the expensive orange juice my mother always looked at but never bought, the good coffee my father loved. The kind that smelled like chocolate. I paid the property taxes 5 years in advance. I paid the utilities 12 months out. I found a small wooden recipe box at a local antique shop and put it in the silverware drawer by the new kettle. Inside, on a thick index card, I wrote a note. My hand was shaking. For late mornings. Loud laughter and lemon tea. Happy 50th. I love you. Oh. The drive up the coast with them was tense. My mother kept trying to read my face. When I pulled into the driveway and told them it was theirs, no mortgage, no bills, paid in full, my father thought I was playing a cruel joke. His hands shook so badly he couldn't get the key in the lock. I had to cover his hands with mine and turn it together. My mother walked through the kitchen and opened the refrigerator and just stood there, staring at the full shelves. She started crying. Not the thin, anxious tears I grew up with. Something deeper. My father walked from room to room touching the walls. He looked out the back window at the sliver of ocean between the trees and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "It's solid." He wasn't talking about the house. That peace lasted 48 hours. I was scrubbing out after a long spinal procedure when my phone lit up. Mom, her voice when I answered was the voice from my childhood. The "don't tell your father" voice. Julia had heard about the house. From Aunt Clara, probably. She was so excited, Mom said. She was crying on the phone. She just wants to visit. Just for lunch. Isn't that nice? I knew Julia's tears. I had been paying for them since I was 12. Mom, you don't have to let her come right now. You just got there. A long, waited pause. Oh, Olivia, don't be silly. It's your sister. What's the harm? She hung up before I could say anything else. Comment if someone in your life treated your silence like permission. Comment if they only called when they needed something. Comment if you spent years being everyone's answer and nobody's question. Subscribe, because what I pulled out of my briefcase in that living room is the only reason this story has the ending it has. I need you to understand Julia. Not the Julia who was screaming in that house, but the one who learned, at 10 years old, that her feelings were a weapon and that I would always absorb the blow. As adults, this calculus hardened into pure machinery. I became the family's financial shock absorber. Every time she fell, I paid the landing fee. During my residency, 100-hour weeks, hospital cafeteria food drowning in student debt, she called me crying. Leo needs braces. The kids are making fun of him. He cries every night. It's $4,000, Olivia. Don't you love him? I drained my emergency savings. Sent it. 2 weeks later, she posted a photo album online. Miami fun. She and Kyle on a beach with drinks, laughing. The photos were time-stamped. She had taken the trip before she called me, run out of money, and used her son's teeth as leverage. That was just one entry in a long ledger. Julia electric bill. Kyle job suit. He didn't get the job. He kept the suit. Julia car. Julia rent. Julia please. It's an emergency. I had spent years telling myself I was helping. I thought if I gave her enough stability, she would eventually find her footing. I was wrong. I wasn't teaching her accountability. I was teaching her where to knock. When they heard about the house, they didn't see a sanctuary for two exhausted elderly people. They saw the largest payout I had ever provided. They saw a free beach house. Julia had already listed it on Airbnb by morning. Cozy seaside getaway. $350 a night. She had the whole summer booked out. She was putting my parents in the small bedroom, the in-law suite she called it, while her friends paid to stay in their home. I want to stop here for a second, because I know some of you watching right now are nodding at your screens in a dark room. If you have ever spent years being the person who quietly absorbed the damage while the people who caused it slept soundly, you know the specific exhaustion I walked into that driveway carrying. Leave a comment if you've ever carried a weight that wasn't yours and never once sent the bill. Subscribe, because the next few minutes are exactly why I finally decided to tell this. The night before, I sat at the kitchen table of my apartment with my briefcase open. I am a neurosurgeon. I remove tumors for a living. I know the difference between something that can be managed and something that has to come out. I had been managing Julia for 25 years. I had been managing my parents' fear of her for longer than that. I had been managing my own guilt on their behalf since I was 10 years old and hiding red-stamped envelopes under my mattress. I had spent 1 week being precise. The kind of precise that does not leave gaps. I had called an attorney the day I bought the house, before I ever told my parents it existed. I had placed it in an irrevocable trust, the Samuel and Ruth Miller Peace Trust. It named them as sole residents. It prohibited any sale, mortgage, or rental without my signature as trustee. It specified that any non-owner staying longer than 72 hours without my written consent was in violation. I had the HOO covenants for the community. I had the Airbnb listing Julia posted that morning, screenshotted with her name attached and the property address confirmed. I had the text messages, the one to her friend Amy where she called me dumb. The one to my father where she wrote he'll cave if mom cries. I had a locksmith named Victor sitting in a gray van 2 houses down. I had driven the coast road with a chocolate cake on the passenger seat, because even then, I was still that 10-year-old girl trying to make it a normal family visit. I set the cake down on the counter. The house went silent. "Everyone in the living room," I said. My voice was the one I use in an operating room. The one that does not expect to be questioned. I placed 5 documents on the coffee table. The deed. The trust. The Airbnb listing. The list of friends who had already prepaid Julia on Venmo for their summer stays. And my phone, open to the text messages. "This," I said, tapping the trust document, "means I control this asset. Not them. Not you. Me, a non-owner staying beyond 72 hours without my written consent, is a violation. You have been here for 48. Kyle laughed. He was still wearing my father's robe. "It's family money," he said. "We're family. We're just making the asset work for us." "Don't be weird about it, Olivia. Family money," I repeated. I let it sit for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and showed them the drafted emails. One to the HO, reporting an unauthorized short-term rental and occupants exploiting elderly residents. One to the county recorder's office, requesting a wellness check and flagging potential elder fraud in violation of an irrevocable trust. One to Airbnb's fraud department, confirming that the person who posted the listing had no legal right to the property. And my text thread with Victor. Kyle's face changed. "You have 5 minutes," I said, "to get your family and your dog out of my parents' house. If you are not in your car in 300 seconds, I send all 3 emails, I call the police to report a trespass, and I text Victor to come change every lock on this property, whether you are inside or out." My mother spoke from the sofa. She looked at Julia. She looked at Kyle. She looked at the muddy floor and the chip crumbs and the ruined rug and the broken lamp. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were full of tears, but they weren't the thin, anxious tears I grew up with. "Do what you need to," she whispered. It was the quietest thing in the room. It was also the loudest sound I had ever heard. I pressed send. Victor's text came back in 8 seconds. "On my way. ETA 2 minutes." What followed was 3 hours of noise. Julia on the floor, Kyle pacing and shouting about lawyers, the kids crying, the dog barking, Victor working his way around the house with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen this exact scene before, whistling low and tuneless as he replaced every lock. The older boy Leo, the one I had paid the braces for, didn't cry. He walked quietly to the guest room, packed his backpack without throwing anything, and came back to stand by the wall with a pale, ashamed face. He was watching his parents. He already knew. Julia took the expensive coffee I had bought for my father. She took the kettle. She took the towels and threw them on the muddy floor. "You can have it," I said. "It's just stuff." This made her angrier. She wanted me to fight. I wouldn't. Kyle's final words at the door. "Your parents are going to be alone because of you. I hope you're happy." "No," I said, holding the door open for him. "I just saved them." He spat on the porch. The car was already packed. Julia didn't look at me when they pulled away, and then, just before they turned the corner, she did. The look was not grief. It was not regret. It was the clean, pure hatred of someone who had finally been stopped. I felt nothing. Just relief, and the sound of the ocean. Victor handed me 4 new keys. I paid him, and gave him $100 tip. He nodded, and got in his van. I slid the new deadbolt home. The click was the most satisfying sound of my life. I sent my parents to bed. Then I cleaned for 4 hours. This was not housekeeping. It was a procedure. I washed the floors on my hands and knees until the wood shone like honey again. I scrubbed the sofa cushions in the dark on the back deck. I ran the towels through with bleach. I dragged the ruined rug to the curb. At 2 in the morning, I sat down on the clean sofa in the quiet house, and for the first time I cried. The aftermath was exactly what I expected. 23 missed calls from Julia by morning. The text cycling from fury to pleading. A Facebook post with a bad photo of me from a family Thanksgiving. The caption a masterpiece of constructed victimhood. Homeless, children in the cold, my sister the monster neurosurgeon. Aunt Clara called. Other relatives called. Kyle sent a cease and desist written in Comic Sans. I blocked Julia's number. I didn't reply online. I didn't defend myself. I would not feed it. My parents stayed. That was the only outcome that mattered. My mother found the empty space where the kettle had been, and said, very quietly, "She took my kettle." I told her I'd buy a new one. She shook her head. "I'll go into town," she said. Her voice was firm. She came back an hour later with a kettle and a bag of flour. That afternoon, the house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. She was baking. She was baking the sadness out, she said. My father found a squeaky hinge on the bathroom door and oiled it. He straightened the picture frame Julia had knocked crooked. He sat in his chair on the porch with a book. He was not fixing things that were broken. He was tending to his home. His hands weren't shaking. A month later, I drove up without calling. I stood outside the house at night and looked in through the window before I went in. The new lamp was on. My father was in his chair, feet up, reading. My mother was at the kitchen table doing a puzzle. The house was lit from within. It smelled like the ocean. I had been a neurosurgeon for years before I understood this. The goal of the procedure is not to defeat the thing you remove. It is to give the healthy tissue room to function again. I removed what was harming my parents not out of anger at Julia, and not out of triumph. Out of the same clarity I bring to the oar. The understanding that some things cannot coexist with healing, and that compassion without precision is not medicine at all. People online still say I destroyed my family. Aunt Clara still doesn't speak to me. Julia's Facebook page remains a shrine to her victimhood. They're wrong. I didn't destroy anything, I stopped funding the dysfunction. Because love is not saying yes to chaos. It is not writing another check. It is protecting peace, even when protecting it means sliding a new deadbolt home, listening to the click, and not looking back. If this story reached you tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment if you've ever had to protect someone you love from the people they love. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.